But we as students have been organizing charity events and doing fundraising events on and off campus. But what would you say is the most important thing that the students should be doing right now? Thank you.
Okay, then I'd like to ask, probably start with Andrew.
Okay. Um, First, to Ishihara-san, congratulations for organizing some relief efforts at the other Washington University. From what I hear, and I'm speaking to people, the Japanese embassy and others might want to step up on this, but what I hear that is most useful for relief activities now is actually cash. That the infrastructure is so damaged that there's a lot of aggregation of actual goods that it's difficult to deliver the goods, but that monetary contributions are very helpful in making the quickest restoration of infrastructure. So it sounds a little bit crass, but I think we have to respond to what's really needed. So in fundraising activities, I think that's the best approach, is what I hear. But congratulations for organizing those efforts. I think on the TEPCO issue is quite important, obviously. We didn't really touch much on the nuclear crisis. I know that there's several events in Washington this week and extensive commentary online about aspects of that. I tend to agree with Professor Tanaka that it's hard to know what's really happened in that area just a few weeks out. And I also tend to think that as this is an ongoing crisis, I'd like to really focus the efforts on how to resolve the crisis. I think that information sharing has been a problem, though, with TEPCO, and there's been some improvement in that way, beginning with acknowledging that the president is ill, that someone else is taking place. But I think I want to leave it at that. On the broader point of crisis management, I just want to underscore Manami-san's point that the interface with local government is one area that I think one could derive some lessons for a future crisis. Another is perhaps bureaucracy coordination. So I think we've seen much better crisis management within each bureaucracy within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Incredible efforts, I think, here in the embassy. But how to coordinate across bureaucracy, which is of course a long-standing problem in Japanese government, could probably be improved. But again, I'd really end on a positive note about the crisis management from the government side.
Okay, Michael.
Just very briefly, on TEPCO, I think that's one area where you're probably going to see a long period of investigations and commissions to try to figure out what happened. Was the planning adequate? Was the emergency response adequate? Is it true, as has been reported, that TEPCO hesitated initially to I don't think that's me, is it? It might have been. I'm sorry.
It's TEPCO.
That TEPCO's calling. LinkedIn. That TEPCO may have hesitated to take the extreme step of putting seawater into the facility, because then that in essence kills the facility. Obviously, there's going to be an unavoidable demand to find out what happened, but I think the government will also find itself somewhat culpable in this respect. And it took about a week or so, I think, for Tokyo to step in and say, we will jointly manage and run the emergency operations together, instead of seeing that TEPCO clearly couldn't handle it in the first 24, 48, 72 hours. It took longer for the government to get involved. So I think there will be probably very long periods of trying to figure out what happened, but that all could be to the good in terms of potential future issues. And then finally, on the local government issue, I mean, it's a great point. I mean, you have all these local governments that have been destroyed, and probably individuals and personnel also victims here. The central government Tokyo stated that it's going to pay for just about all of the reconstruction. At least that's the current plan. Whether or not that's possible, that's one area that I would, if I were the local government, on the one hand you're thinking, great, I don't have to bear the expense. On the other hand, it also means you have less latitude in determining what gets done. And so if you want a better integration of the local and central government level, the fact that the government's going to be providing all the funds will give it, as it would have had probably anyway, undue influence over that process. And I would think that the potential at least exists, that the localities' self-perceived interests may not be answered by that, and how you get around that, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I would like to make a few observations about the struggle that TEPCO is now engaged in. As I said in my presentation, it is very hard to make a fair judgment as to the management of the crisis unless you know really the details of what really happened and who involved and in what sense. So it's very hard for me to make any fair judgment, but my guess indicates that it is a typical sort of malfunctioning of organizational politics, where you cannot do well what you have not practiced. For the leadership of TEPCO, which is a large organization, many specialized departments exist, specialists on nuclear energy, specialists on power supply, specialists on sales, and then lots of division of labor among them. And in many ways, I think certain specialized area, president or chairman cannot easily intervene. And then what happened in Fukushima was, I think, in many ways, really out of their assumptions. Nothing of the sort that devastated all the backups. They believed there are enough kind of backups, and all backups are gone. And then that was not really anticipated. And then what you are going to do, you have not thought about. Then what happened is you use the tools that you already have. That's a typical organizational routine matters. And then first you have to ask your specialist what you would do. And then it's not good for the president or chairman to intervene early. And that sort of things, in my speculation, seems to have happened. I don't know. But then it is an ongoing crisis. As the newspaper reports and others indicated, there are lots of challenges which I know very little about their engineering, but as the way they indicate from the reports in that all sorts of things, complex issues with lots of trade-offs. If you do this, that would decrease the possibility of succeeding in some other areas. And so you need to do all sorts of things, and I really feel for the workers and hope for their best. Well, I'd like to, well, please, yes.
Thank you. My name is Sam Lederer from Federation of Electric Power Companies of Japan. And my question is for Dr. Oros. You spoke about improving U.S.-Japan relationships, more support for the alliance after this. Do you see that trickling down to the local level to, impacting, say, the Futenma issue or things like that, or will it just be a more broader sense of support? Thank you.
Thank you. And any other questions? Well, I think at the very end, yes. Yes, yes.
Thank you. Mike Billington with Executive Intelligence Review. Since we're looking forward, I wonder if you could address the lessons learned for the United States from this in light of two things. One is that this earthquake, as we now know, is part of a series of very, very severe earthquakes that correlate with extreme solar activity and are likely to continue, and that California and the Northwest are certainly due. And unlike Japan, which is probably the best prepared, the U.S. is woefully unprepared. And in fact, the Obama administration is taking down many of our research and monitoring capacities at NASA and NOAA and other places. So I think the U.S. has a great deal to learn from the crisis and from Japan, and I wonder what you could say about that.
Well, thank you very much. I think at the very end, yes, please. I think the microphone is coming.
Peter Piscoffery, Catholic University of America. Two questions. If the panel could collectively tell me, was there one specific aspect of I believe the Democratic Party of Japan? If you could pinpoint what was the one particular failure in this particular incident, and is it too early to kind of, gauge the long-term impact of this particular disaster?
Okay, then again, we start with what? Or maybe okay, yeah. Then yes, please.
Kyo Koreeda from Baltimore, Maryland. And adding to Ishikawa-san's question, which organization is the most efficient to send money among hundreds and hundreds of organizations we hear?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, then I think the lady at the end of this section.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Buster, and I belong to an organization called CISV, which sends children overseas for international experiences. My question is, how, if at all, does this affect international exchanges?
Okay, then let us start with Andrea again.
I think for the sake of time, I'll pick maybe two questions to respond to and move to the panel, and we can come back if your question isn't answered. So specifically addressed to me was the impact on the alliance at the local level. I guess this is another example of what Professor Tanaka ascribed to me of sort of cool-headed compassion. I'd like to believe that this groundswell of support is going to have a tremendous difference on local perceptions of the alliance, but I don't really think that will be the case, at least fully. And I say that for two reasons. Specifically, you ask about the Futenma issue, and my understanding, and kind of obviously there's a lot to read right now, but I think that if you read some of the Okinawa press on this issue compared to like Asahi Shimbun or Sankei Shimbun, I think there's less emphasis on the role of U.S. forces in the relief than there has been in the main island media, one should say. And those who follow the Okinawa issues with U.S. forces will be aware of the difference in media coverage, and that that Okinawa is an unusual place in Japan, and that the major media organizations of mainland Japan, as we say, are not the same organizations that are dominant in Okinawa. And I think it's understandable, of course, that the Okinawa media would cover the issue more from their perspective. And I've read in the media, Okinawa media, concerns that mainlanders, as they say, main islanders, will have the perception, an increased perception of the need for U.S. forces, but not want to then share the burden of hosting those forces, and so that will put tensions on Okinawa, and I can understand that position. So I don't think it's going to fundamentally change that debate. In some ways, it could exacerbate the debate. On mainland Japan, I would expect that there will be some increase in support for U.S. forces, but support for U.S. forces in the main island Japan is already quite high, and support for the alliance was the highest it's really ever been before the earthquake. So I don't think that in itself was such a big problem in the past. Let me respond to the question about lessons for the U.S. because I'm a native of Southern California, earthquake zone.